Well, the Gonzaga Bulldogs are back in the top 10 of the AP poll for the 177th time in school history. And with the schedule they have coming up, they might be up there for a while.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you through another season of Gonzaga Hoops. And folks, we are at the Oregon coast enjoying the post-Christmas, pre-New Year's kind of week of celebration here. For those of you checking the show out on YouTube and noticing a very different background here, but the Zags, of course, still have themselves a couple games left before we get into 2023. We're going to talk about that Eastern Oregon game against an NAIA opponent and what that means for the Zags to close out the show. But we're starting things out talking AP poll. The Zags are back. They may not have reached back up to their number 2 status that they began the season with in the AP poll, but they are back in the top 10. It is always wonderful to see Gonzaga with a number in the top 10. I was going to say a single-digit number. Zags haven't quite gotten to that level yet. They are 10th right now in the AP poll, first time back since the week of November 21st. Of course, after that, they lost to Purdue in the PK Invitational. That sent them back outside of the top 10, and they have now crawled their way back in, notably because of their win over Alabama. Of course, that was a huge victory for the Bulldogs. The win over Montana didn't exactly look great, but a win is a win, and right now a lot of teams are just struggling to put games in the W column, so the Zags can stick in the top 10 for right now. Looking at the overall top 10, here is the group right now. Purdue and UConn 1 and 2. 2 of the 3 remaining undefeated teams in all of college basketball, the third being New Mexico out of the Mountain West. So, of course, those 2 teams deserve to be up there. Purdue's continued success is also helping Gonzaga for what it's worth. That is the kind of thing that tends to help the Zags. Of course, Texas has been great all season long as well. So those kind of things tend to help Gonzaga's resume not look nearly as bad as maybe we thought that it looked early in the year with some of those tough losses. So Purdue and UConn 1 and 2. Houston is 3rd. Kansas and Arizona round out the top 5. Shout out to Tommy Lloyd. The Zags now have 2 members of their coaching tree coaching in the top 10 between Gonzaga and Arizona and Tommy Lloyd's squad. They have been fantastic this year. The front court, Azuolas Tubelis, Oumar Ballo, have just been extraordinary. They got some issues in the guard room. We'll see if Courtney Ramey, the Texas transfer, can kind of step up and be a big contributor there. Kirk Risa has been a little bit inconsistent, but this is a really good team out west and going to be a strong contender alongside Gonzaga, of course, alongside UCLA for the best team on the West Coast this upcoming season. Rounding out the top 10, you have the Texas Longhorns, who are certainly in a bit of a challenging situation right now with Coach Chris Beard and the domestic violence situation. We'll kind of see how that ends up shaking out and what that potentially does for the Longhorns going down the stretch. Then you have Tennessee, Rick Barnes' squad, who, of course, did a number on Gonzaga in an exhibition game. It didn't count, so that's worth noting. Tennessee, has been a bit of an odd team this year, but Ken Pom still absolutely loves them. I think Ken Pom has them 3rd in the entire country right now. The loss to Colorado is an anomaly, but the rest of their season has gone pretty darn well, and they could continue to improve as freshman Julian Phillips continues to adjust to life in college basketball. Rounding it out, you have Arkansas at number 8. We'll see how long they stick up there. They have some pretty serious injury issues that have kind of hampered them throughout the season and may continue to impact them as they get into SEC play. Then you have Bama. I can understand why Gonzaga fans might be like, okay, Bama and Gonzaga right next to each other, and you put Bama first. Like, I know that the argument that, well, this team beat this team, so they should be ranked higher, is flawed when you're looking at overall resumes. I get that. I understand that. But when they're right next to each other, it just feels a little bit frustrating. Like, okay, it seems like Gonzaga could have been 9th and Alabama could have been 10th, and there wouldn't really be any arguing on that regard. Gonzaga won. They beat them pretty badly in that game. I know it was a 10-point victory, but they handled that game pretty well. Am I ultimately concerned about this? Not at all. You guys know that I'm not particularly concerned about AP polls in general. But yeah, that was one that was like, well, okay, it seems like that could have been reversed a little bit. But the Zags should have a pretty clear path to stay in the top 10 here for a pretty long time. And I know some naysayers might be like, oh, well, Gonzaga is going to just keep climbing up because of their schedule. And to be clear, WCC still good. And Gonzaga's early WCC conference slate is not the easiest that they have going on. Of course, we got the Eastern Oregon game coming up. That's the same type of game that basically every team has. It's an exhibition game. They're just scheduling it later in the season at this point. More of just a pure tune-up getting into conference play, a game that is kind of just there so that they don't have this really long gap of games from before Christmas all the way until New Year's Eve when they play Pepperdine on the road, or excuse me, Pepperdine at home. So this is kind of more of just a, hey, let's get our guys out there. Let's get them some minutes, some action, some gameplay so that they're a little bit more prepared, a little bit less sore and stiff going into the conference slate. Then they got Pepperdine, like we said, on the 31st, not the most challenging home opener for the Zags, although Pepperdine has some very legitimate talent on that roster. Maxwell Lewis is an NBA player without a doubt. He's Jalen Williams-esque in some ways, more in the way of being a top-tier NBA prospect out of a relatively unknown or not typically an NBA generating program in Santa Clara for Jalen Williams, of course, Pepperdine for Maxwell Lewis. They're different players. Lewis is more of a creator, more of a slasher, a really good big bodied guy, but still cool to see NBA talent coming out of programs that aren't Gonzaga, aren't St. Mary's, aren't BYU in the WCC. Houston Millett, fantastic point guard for Pepperdine as well. After that, though, they go on the road and they got three tough ones. Three tough road matchups coming up. They got USF on the 5th at War Memorial. That's a tough game. USF has been rolling lately after spanking Arizona State. They, in fact, got themselves one vote in the AP poll. We'll talk about that momentarily. Then they play at Santa Clara, another solid squad, a team that maybe hasn't quite reached the potential they had last year after losing, a guy like Jalen Williams and Yusuf Vrankic, very, very talented players to kind of have out of the program, but still a solid squad over there. And then they're on the road the next week at BYU. Marriott Center is always an absolutely popping off place to play basketball. 20,000 loud and proud for the last time. Gonzaga is a conference opponent on the road. That is going to be a really, really fun game of basketball for the Bulldogs. Kind of sad to see the the WCC rivalry with BYU ending, but what a game that is going to be. So for Gonzaga, it looks like they got themselves an opportunity with some wins there to stay in the top 10. Those are good enough wins that it shouldn't deter them from they shouldn't move down after securing victories there, even if they're close victories, but also teams that Gonzaga should be able to put away and secure victories on going into the next couple of weeks. Looking at how the WCC did in the AP poll. Again, we mentioned USF received one vote. St. Mary's did not receive any. I was a little bit surprising. San Diego State received 39 votes. Again, transitive property doesn't always matter. However, these two teams went up against each other head to head when they were very, very equally ranked in KenPom, equally ranked just in the net and everything like that. And St. Mary's won. And now you look at a spot where, San Diego State has played better since then, but St. Mary's is also 18th in KenPom, so they didn't even receive a single vote for the AP Top 25, just proof that the mid-major schools, when they have a couple losses tacked on their record, it just kind of automatically pushes them out of any level of consideration. It's frustrating with St. Mary's being at the level that they're at right now, that they're still getting this kind of treatment. 18th in KenPom. Their most recent loss was to Colorado State, and that hurts. Colorado State is not the program they were last year when they had Evan Batty, when they had Jabari Walker. Like, they have fallen down a little bit. Keyshawn Bartholomew transferred to Oregon, but it's still, he was at Colorado, not Colorado State. But regardless, they still lost a lot of talent from last year's team, and now that loss kind of hurt St. Mary's in a significant way, but they have wins over San Diego State. They have win over New Mexico State, win over Oral Roberts, win over Wyoming. There are other tough losses to Washington. So Washington, Colorado State, two not great losses. I'll admit that. Their other losses are to undefeated New Mexico and Houston. Can't really fault them for those losses there. So I thought St. Mary's deserved a little bit more love, but at the end of the day, we're not going to be overly upset about that. St. Mary's has a chance to crawl back in the top 25 if they pick up some nice wins in conference play. All right, Eastern Oregon is Gonzaga's opponent for Thursday, an NAIA bout designed for the Zags to tune things up before conference play. More on that matchup, but first, today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's extremely simple to use. Start by adding your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags. And I want to thank all of you for making Locked On Zags your first listen of the day. For your second listen today, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. It was Monday's episode of the show, a year in review. Fantastic content from Peter Bukowski and everybody affiliated with Locked On Sports Today. It's the biggest stories in sports. You go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights that only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. All right, let's meet the Mounties of Eastern Oregon University, Gonzaga's opponent out of the Frontier Conference, an NAIA school located in LeGrand, Oregon. For the record, this is not entirely related to the Zags or college basketball. LeGrand, Oregon, beautiful, beautiful country, beautiful area. Drive through there a fair amount to go visit my family who lives in Colorado, and it's on the way. Beautiful area. Highly worth checking out for people in Spokane or in the inland Northwest who haven't made it down south to that area. Very, very beautiful place. The Mounties are 7-4 on the year. They're 4-1 in league play in the conference that they play in. And they've had some nice wins. They have wins over a couple Gonzaga affiliated people. They have a victory over Warner Pacific. Warner Pacific is the first team that Gonzaga played as an exhibition this year. Warner Pacific is also the school that Matt Gregg, the father of Ben Gregg, is the athletic director there. So kind of fun for Gonzaga to get an opportunity to play Warner Pacific this year. Of course, kind of acknowledging that relationship and that connection that they have. Also, you know, Eastern Oregon has played this team, so there's some familiarity there with the level of opponent that they're playing. Eastern has also played Southern Oregon, defeated Southern Oregon in that game. Southern Oregon is where Will Graves is playing basketball. For those who missed this story this last year, Will Graves entered the transfer portal with another year of eligibility. Actually, he might have 2 years of eligibility regardless. He wanted to go back closer to home, closer to where his father, Kelly Graves, of course, coaches at the University of Oregon. So it's cool to see Will getting a chance to really play significant minutes at the college basketball level and, of course, play against this team, Eastern Oregon, who Gonzaga is going to face on the 28th. The Mounties also have a win over D3 Linfield University, formerly Linfield College, located in McMinnville, Oregon. So cool to see them beat a team at a higher level than them. They did play one Division I team. They played Boise State earlier in the year, and it went about as well as you would have expected. Boise State hung 90 on Eastern Oregon in that one and only managed to score 54. So it was a 90-54 drubbing from Boise State over Eastern Oregon. Again, that's kind of what you expect in these kind of exhibition style games. The Zags, in fact, played Eastern Oregon last year, won that one 115-62. I would expect a fairly similar result here as well. It's just, that's kind of how these games go. They're designed in place for these teams to get an opportunity to go play at a Division I arena, to go play in front of a Division I crowd, to go play against Division I athletes and kind of really test their mettle and kind of see what they can do against higher level talent. It's a cool opportunity for the universities, for the NAIA schools. It's also a cool opportunity for Gonzaga to just get to tune things up and kind of get ready for conference play, as we talked about a little bit in the first segment. I like having these exhibition games at this point in the season rather than right at the beginning of the year. I think having one at the beginning of the year and one right here before conference play actually makes a lot of sense. I know some people kind of look at the schedule and roll their eyes like, oh, great, you know, is this another one of these kind of games for Gonzaga? But this year, I'm fairly thankful for it because they've needed games like this. They need games to just kind of relax a little bit and know that you can put the bench guys in with 10 minutes to go. And, you know, we kind of hoped that some of Gonzaga's other non-conference games might be more like that result. And it didn't happen against Montana, and it didn't happen against Kent State, and it didn't happen against Portland State to an extent. We didn't really get to see that opportunity there. It happened a bit against North Florida, so we've seen it a little bit at times this year. But for the most part, Gonzaga hasn't really had opportunities to like get some of those bench players going and let Drew Timme sit for 10 straight minutes and not have to worry about, should we bring him back in? Do we need some more momentum? Like, just let those guys relax, let them do their thing in the first 25-ish minutes of the game and then kind of cool off after that. And that's really what I kind of want to focus on as we get later in the show. I want to shout out the best player on Eastern Oregon, though, Philip Matare, who is averaging 17 points a game for a schedule that has been, by and large, pretty tough for Eastern Oregon, at least by their standards. Of course, playing a D1 team, playing a D3 team, playing some of the better programs in the NAIA, and they played a ranked team in Montana Tech earlier in the year. They've played a pretty tough schedule, and he has been very fantastic. So look for him to have a nice game against the Zags in that one. But by and large, this game is about getting Gonzaga's backup players some extra minutes and getting them some opportunity to really show what they're capable of doing when actually getting those minutes on the floor. And that's what I want to talk about in the third and final segment of today's show. We're going to look at my 5 things to watch in this game. You guys know I've been doing this 5 things ahead of every Gonzaga game, and typically it's 5 keys to victory, and that's more necessary when they're playing Alabama or Baylor or Kentucky. In a game like this, I don't think a victory is as concerning of a result for the Zags. They're going to get the victory. It's more about what things happen on the basketball court. What am I going to be looking for to see, hey, this is some progress. This is something that we want to see from X player or even Mark Few or the team in general or whatever it may be. So we're going to get to that here in the final segment. But before we do that, I want to tell you a message here from the NHTSA. You're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks. It's the holidays after all, right? A few becomes maybe a few too many. As the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride. Now you live nearby. You can make it home okay. It's not a big deal. What are the odds you're going to get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that could happen? Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. All right, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags. We're still talking Gonzaga's final non-conference game before they get fully into the conference slate against the Eastern Oregon Mounties out of La Grande, Oregon. They're playing them on the 28th of December. I believe the tip time for that one is 2 p.m. So a matinee game in the kennel. Of course, the students will be on a Christmas break, so probably a bit of a lull in the stadium. Hopefully the crowd that comes in for that one can bring it a little bit, although, again, I'm not expecting the result to be a particularly competitive one, not after the result last year, again, 115-62 in that one. So we're going to talk about kind of what I'm hoping to see in this game. The first one is no starters over 25 minutes. Quite frankly, I would love to see no starters over 20 minutes, but that's not how Mark Few rolls. That is not how Mark Few has ever rolled. He just is less willing to pull starters early in games. Now, he hasn't had very many opportunities this year, and I wonder if that's going to create an opportunity where he does pull the trigger a little bit earlier in this contest, and we see Drew Timme out of the game at the under 12 in the second half, maybe, or he's just done with 12 minutes to go, or Julian Strother coming out a little bit earlier, or Nolan Hickman, who's played a lot of minutes this year, maybe he gets an extra rest. Anton Watson gets an extra rest. Like, I think getting those guys, like, none of those guys need to play over 25 minutes. None of them. None of the guys who start on this team need to do that. I don't think Malachi Smith really needs to play a huge chunk of minutes either, although I don't mind if he ends up in the 25, even 30-minute range, just because we like seeing what he can do, and perhaps getting him some more minutes with the starters might be something that makes some sense, as we have discussed potential starting lineup changes that the Zags could make, Mark Few could choose to make, depending on how he feels, how confident he feels with Rasir Bolton's performance, and of course what Hunter Salas has been able to do coming off the bench as well. But I don't really want to see a lot of the rotation guys playing super huge minutes. I think, the starters, Malachi Smith can maybe play 20 to 25-ish, not a whole lot more than that. I'd like to say good minutes from Hunter Salas. We'll talk about him a little bit more later. But by and large, for the guys who play significant minutes already, let's let them rest. They need to get out there, get their legs stretched, get going, because, the part of the reason that this game is appealing is to get back into game shape. So I don't think that they should be resting entirely, because otherwise they go into that Pepperdine game not having played a full basketball game since December 20th. I don't want that. I want all the starters to play. Just there's no need to push them any further than they need to be pushed in this one. Next up, sticking on that line is I want to see Efton Reid and Ben Gregg minutes together. We have seen this at times, but often one of these two guys is playing alongside Drew Timme. The Ben Gregg, Drew Timme lineups work very, very well. The Efton Reid and Drew Timme lineups do not work very well at all. That is why Efton Reid has fallen out of the rotation. That's why he's not playing. There's a little bit more to it than that. He has looked a little bit uncomfortable in the offense. He gets in foul trouble almost instantly when he comes into basketball games. So part of his not being able to play very many minutes per game is his doing. It's not Mark Few's doing. It's like if he's committing fouls, he has to come out of the game. Like there's not a whole lot more to it than that. But there's no debate that the Efton Reid, Drew Timme lineup just hasn't been very cohesive. They haven't figured out the rhythm on that lineup. And frankly, they probably won't. I think we'll see more of it as time goes on. Perhaps if Ben starts to struggle, if there's, knock on wood, an injury for Anton Watson or Gregg or somebody like that. But I just don't think that Efton is going to be used to play alongside Drew Timme all that much. However, Efton Reid and Ben Gregg playing together could be a pretty big part of what Gonzaga does in the future. It could be a very big part of what Gonzaga does in the future. So why not let those guys play a full 8-minute stretch together, a 10 to 12-minute stretch together potentially in this game? Like, let those guys go. We've seen it, and it works. It works better. Ben is more of a perimeter player. He's a good outside shooter. He has showed a much better handle on the basketball. He's less likely to turn it over. He still has some issues with that. Don't get me wrong. We see him he just automatically turns and makes the pass without checking, and a defender can steal it. Like stuff like that he just needs to fine tune and kind of clean up. But by and large, he has been a better perimeter basketball player than he was in his first couple of years. We've seen tremendous growth in that area, and Efton can just feast in this game. And I know that like feasting on NAIA players isn't exactly going to make Efton significantly better, but just getting comfortable in the offense, being the guy who goes down in the paint and is constantly fighting for position while Gonzaga swings the ball around, that Drew Timme is extraordinary at that. Filip Petrusev was extraordinary at that. Shemek Karnowski, extraordinary at that. Efton Reid, that's going to be what he does. And so even though, they're playing an opponent where, they're not going to challenge him as physically because he's just freaking huge, it's still good for him to practice those movements, get the familiarity, the rhythm, the rhyme of how Gonzaga's offense works. And so getting that opportunity and doing it alongside Ben Gregg, a player that he's going to play alongside for potentially the next couple of years in Spokane, that's perfect. That needs to happen in this game. I really do hope that they play 8 to 10 minutes together. I think we'll see some really, really nice stuff from both of those guys on both ends of the floor if they get that opportunity in this one. Third key in this game here, some minutes from Dominick Harris. It's been a topic, a long topic throughout the season. It's been more of a topic on Twitter because of the presence of Dom himself on Twitter and his family members, and some times that they have expressed frustration about his playing time, whether directly or indirectly. We've seen it on Instagram as well. We haven't seen much of Dom this year, and we know he was dealing with a foot injury before the season. It, of course, cost him all of last year. We heard that he was just getting started practicing about 3 weeks before the season started. We saw him a little bit early in the year. He played a little bit against Texas. He played a little bit against Portland State. Haven't seen much from him since then. Obviously, this is a game where there's a pretty legitimate opportunity for him to come in and maybe play backup point guard minutes if Nolan Hickman's resting, maybe play off the ball a little bit, kind of cut into the rotation where Malachi Smith, Rasir Bolton, and Hunter Salas are kind of all playing significant minutes at the 2. That has hampered Dom's ability to get playing time this year, but perhaps this is a game where he can come out there. We can see how he's adjusted to the offense, how he's learning the plays, how he looks on both ends of the floor. We just haven't gotten to see a whole lot of that yet. I've maintained on this podcast multiple times that Mark Few is very adamant to say that playing time is a privilege. It is not a right. So even in a game like this, Dom doesn't earn playing time simply because Gonzaga is up by 15, 20, 25, 30, 40, 50. It doesn't matter. That's not how Mark Few operates. If he doesn't believe you have earned playing time for whatever reason, performance in practice, performance academically, anything that it could be, he won't play you. And so if that is what happens here, and we don't know what's going to happen, maybe Dom will play 12 minutes in this game and look awesome. Maybe he won't play at all. And there's a reason for whatever happens. I guess that's the best way to put it at this point. And so it'll be interesting to see. This is the kind of game that is fairly telling. If Dom doesn't play and we don't get any report that he's hurt or sick, you got to start wondering what's going on in that situation. So for me, that is going to be something that I'm going to be keeping a close eye on. Not only how Dom plays if he does get in the game, but what it might mean if we don't end up seeing him play. Then the next key here, I mentioned we're going to talk about Hunter Salas later. I want to see more offense from him. And I don't think that this isn't a criticism of him. It's more that like he has filled his role really well as a defensive specialist, a high energy guy, and a guy who moves well without the basketball, but who doesn't do a lot with the ball in his hands. And part of that is just, I think, by design. So he's running the offense, he's facilitating. We see him come down the floor even when he's playing the point guard when Nolan Hickman's out, and he kind of just immediately gives it up to a wing, and they start setting up their offense to try to get Drew the basketball. And to be clear, Hunter's not doing anything wrong. I think that's great. I think he runs the offense smoothly. He doesn't make a bunch of careless turnovers. He's crisp with the basketball, and most of his offense comes from transition scoring or backdoor cuts and getting to the rim that way. But I want to see a little bit more offensive creativity, and I hope this is a game where they can kind of give that to him. It's the second half. The Zags are up 45 points. The starters are all out. Hunter's the kind of the best offensive player who's on the floor. Give him the ball. Let him create. Let him take a guy off the dribble. Let him do a dribble, drive, and kick. Like, let him set up a high screen from Ben Gregg or Efton Reid and kind of run the offense that way. Like, Hunter has that in his bag, and we haven't seen it much. And he is such a good player. He's so good at just filling his role and doing what is asked of him. And I think that's what makes him such an incredible Zag and a fantastic piece to this team. Like, he's a championship caliber player to have on your team. You love guys like that, but let's let him cook. Let Hunt cook. Like, let's let him go and let him do some stuff and see if he can get out and juke somebody and cross them up and go dunk on somebody, because I know that he can do it. And I think this would be a fun opportunity for him to kind of showcase some of that stuff, put some stuff on tape for the NBA scouts. It's not just on the defensive end of the floor, all that kind of stuff. Hunt's definitely got it. I'm not sure that he's going to go out and try to get it unless he kind of gets the go ahead of like, hey man, it's your time. Let's go. He's in the game with Efton, and maybe Ben's also in the game. And then you got a couple of, Dom's in the game alongside him, and maybe Colby Brooks is in the game too, and you kind of got this lineup where Hunt's the guy. So let's go get it. Let's go get out there and score some points and do some fun things on the offensive side of the ball and kind of showcase that part of Hunt's game that hasn't really showed up just by necessity for the Zags in his first couple of years. And yeah, I mentioned Colby Brooks, and that's kind of the last one here. Let's see some walk-ons. We got to see more of the walk-ons. We haven't seen enough of the walk-ons this year. So obviously Colby Brooks is the big one. He played in that North Florida game. He reminds me a little bit of Connor Griffin, who played at Gonzaga about a little more than a half decade ago. Man, that makes me feel old. Griffin, he ended up going to University of Washington, played football. He was a tight end at UW. After spending some time at Gonzaga, he ended up working at Pepperdine. Now I believe he's a video coordinator for the Dallas Mavericks, if I'm not mistaken. But he was a highlight reel player, really, really athletic, probably could have played at another school had he wanted that opportunity. Of course, he chose the football route, which very cool for him. Colby Brooks, same type of thing, AAU player in high school in the LA area, really talented player at his high school, came to Gonzaga as a recruited walk-on, hasn't really played in the first couple of years, and has now got the opportunity to play against North Florida. I'd love to see him more in this game, see what he can do, see some highlight reel stuff from him. Abe Eagle came in at the same time as Colby Brooks, has yet to play in a single game. Would like to see him just get an opportunity. You don't come to Gonzaga knowing you come to Gonzaga knowing you're not going to play much when you're in that role, but like you'd like to play a little bit, and this is a good opportunity for him to get out on the floor in front of the home crowd and do some work. Of course, Joe Few, the crowd favorite. They love chanting for Joe. They love seeing him get in the game. Mark Few's kid. It'd be fun to see him get some action in this contest as well. And then finally, something I'm curious about, and not entirely sure I understand how the rules work here, so forgive me, but I believe the plan right now, it seems, is Braden Huff is going to redshirt. I think that's very obvious based on what has happened so far this season. He has not played in the game. He has not been reported to be injured in any way. The talent in the front court ahead of him is just better than him, so it's not surprising that he is not playing. He is here as a development piece, a kind of long-term project, and so the red shirt makes sense, but I believe you can play in an exhibition game as a red shirt, and an exhibition game in the middle of the season is odd, and maybe that kind of changes the conversation for him. But ultimately, I think Braden Huff could play in this game, and it wouldn't count against him as a red shirt, and that could be kind of fun. Let's get him 5 minutes and see what he can do. Let him stretch his legs. Let him kind of showcase that outside shot, some of the skills that he has as a basketball player. You could make a similar argument for Caden Perry. I mentioned that Perry had 12 points against this team last year, his best performance of the year, of course, in an exhibition game. And of course, he dealt with injuries last year. But I think if they're planning to medically redshirt him, trying to make that argument of like, oh yeah, he's clearly good enough to play here in late December might kind of curtail that argument. I also have no idea if he is able to play. He might be legitimately still very hurt and not able to get on the court. We haven't really gotten much of an update on Caden Perry this year. So those are two guys to watch out for. If I was a betting man, I would bet that neither of them play. And I'd be pretty surprised if either of them do, quite honestly, but something to keep an eye on at least as this game gets out of hand, hopefully pretty early for the Gonzaga Bulldogs. All right, well, that is going to do it for me today. Don't forget to check out the new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. Myself and Isaac Shade of Locked On Tar Heels break down the biggest stories in the sport. You can find that wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. You can also find Locked On Zags on YouTube if you haven't done so yet. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Zags, hit that big red subscribe button, follow it up with Locked On College Basketball. Always appreciate all of your support. And of course, as always, go Zags.